We're kickstarting the day with a fantastic workshop on data storytelling, how to become a data storyteller in 60 minutes. Now, many of you might be wondering, can I really be a data storyteller? And how is the next 60 minutes going to change my life? I can say with absolute certainty, it will. Joining us today is Dhaval Thanki. He's the Executive Vice President at Loginext Solutions. And he's someone who's deeply passionate about what he does. He's a thought leader, a market expert in areas like SaaS, digital, data analytics, and business development. He's worked with Cartesian Consulting. He's had his own startups like GapMob. And I was just speaking to Dhaval, Loginext, even though it's 250 members strong, it still really works like a startup, in spite of it being one of the world's largest logistics automation platforms. So really looking forward to this session, and let's make it interactive. If you have any questions, please, raise your hand and ask a question. That's perfectly okay. Thank you, Dhaval. Thank you for being here.
Right.
Over to you.
Pleasure. Am I audible? Yeah, I think you guys at the back, can you hear me? Okay, so let's dive right into this, right? First of all, good morning, and everyone's heard of the term data storytelling, right? Have you guys heard of this term, or this is the first time you guys are hearing about it? See guys, I say this every time I speak, but it's important to set the context. We live in a data age, right? There were different ages that human history has been through, right? The Stone Age, the Machine Age, the Agriculture Age. And every age has its own set of skill sets and opportunities that it presents for us to grow as people, right? So today we live in a data age, right? And how do we know that we live in a data age? So let's use some data to understand that we live in a data age, right? And the data point is the amount of data that was generated since the beginning of time till 2004, the amount of data that was generated from the beginning of time till 2004 is the amount of data that we're generating every 48 hours now. Just to put that into perspective, right? Google has published this information, so it's fully credible, right? That is telling you that we're living in a data age. You hear things like data is the new oil, data is the business advantage, every company is a data company. Tesla CEO Elon Musk in a press conference said that Tesla is not a car company. Tesla is a data company. Because every time the car runs on the road, it gathers data, which makes the car more and more intelligent, right? So today there is no such thing called as a bank or an insurance company or a manufacturing company. Every company is a data company. Today the amount of data that is used in manufacturing, right? Robotics, AI, machine learning, IoT, right? All of that is different use cases of data, right? So every organization today is a data organization, and therefore we as professionals, right, in whatever capacity we exist on this planet, we're students, professionals, business owners, CEOs, executives, whatever. From a janitor to the richest guy on the planet, everyone needs to be data literate today in some or the other way, because that's going to decide how successful you are in whatever it is that you do, right? And that's why what we're going to do today is invest 60 minutes. The title, of course, is a story in itself, right? Like, how can you become a data storyteller in 60 minutes? And why do you really need to become a data storyteller, first of all? Okay, so let's just quickly dive into this. I'll skip some slides just to make it more focused for the next 60 minutes. Before understanding why do we need to become data storytellers, let's look at what is data storytelling, right? In simple terms, processing data and representing it in a manner that invokes the right emotion. That's a data story. Digest this. Processing data and representing it in a manner that creates the right emotion. That's a data story. And data stories are replete in our lives, in the most basic of cases to the most sophisticated of cases. What's the most basic data use case that you've seen from a story perspective? Let's imagine a kid participates in a race, comes home and says, hey, I came third, right? He comes home to his parents and says, hey, I came third. What would the parents feel? They'll feel good, right? Like he came third. But what if there were just 3 people running? He could have well come and said, hey, I came last in the race. It's the same event. I could have said, hey, I came last. How would you feel? Nobody will feel great, right? Oh, you came last. Oh, that's so bad. But what if I come and say, I came third? Oh, that feels good. People may not even bother to ask you a follow-up question and say, hey, how many people were running, by the way? Most of the people will not ask that question. And this is a very, very basic example, but this extrapolates into as sophisticated scenarios as you can imagine, right into board meetings, to valuation discussions, to IPO listings, to World Bank decisions, to decisions that Apple, Microsoft, and Google take. And I'll give you some examples to expand upon what I'm trying to tell you. It's really the narrative. It's not the event. And that's why storytelling is important. The event could be anything. How are you able to build a story on top of it? Decides how your audience is going to feel about it. And it's about emotions. It's not about data. We're all human beings. Data is not our programming language. Data is the programming language of machines. Emotions is the programming language of human beings. Every decision you take in life is driven by emotion, not by data. You use data to rationalize your emotions. Oh, I love this car, so I want to buy it. That's your first starting point. Then you will look for all the data to justify that emotion. Data is always used to justify emotional decisions. Remember that. Your null hypothesis is always going to be driven by an emotion, which will then get sort of substantiated by data. You get what I'm saying? And that's why being able to tell a story is important. Why? Because story connects data to emotion, right? Story connects data to emotions. And if you're a good storyteller, you'll become very good at converting data into emotion. If you're not able to convert data into emotion, data on its own is not going to be very helpful for you. Remember that. The same data that 2 people see, they will have a different view of it and they'll tell a different story. Depending on what story you're telling, you will be able to successfully use that data or unsuccessfully use it. Let's look at some examples for that. But before that, try to take away this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend 10 minutes doing theory, and then we're going to spend 20-30 minutes looking at examples to implement this theory. So that at the end of the 60 minutes, you all go out of this room as storytellers, right? So as I said, why do you need to do good data storytelling? Because you want the audience to experience a certain emotion. Why do you want the audience to experience a certain emotion, by the way? Because you want the audience to take some action, right? Why do you want to tell a data story? So that the audience experiences an emotion. Why do you want the audience to experience an emotion? Because you want the audience to take some action. See the connection here. And that connection comes through the story. Because if you look at it, let's look at, when a company announces their quarterly results, right? Zomato announced their quarterly results, or Apple announces their quarterly results, or Microsoft announces their quarterly results, right? A quarterly result is a data story. They talk about what has happened, how did their business do, what is their gross margin, etc., etc. If you see most e-commerce startups in India, they report this number called GMV, which tells you what is the revenue that the company generated and how many transactions did they do. They don't talk about profitability because it's not something that adds up to a good data story for them. Why I'm saying this is because the context of the story is important. Why are you telling the story? Who is the listener? And what do you want the listener to do after listening to your story? Right? That's important. If you don't have these 3 things clear enough in your mind, you won't be able to tell the right story. Because the story will always be from the vantage point of who is the speaker, who is the audience, and what does the speaker want the audience to do. In a quarterly results announcement, if I am the CEO of Apple, I am announcing my quarterly results. Who is my audience? Shareholders, right? What do I want the shareholders to do? I want the shareholders to feel good about their investment in my company. I want the shareholders to invest more in my company. I want the shareholders to hold on to their investments in my company. That's what I want them to do, right? Right? So I need to tell the story in a manner that achieves that end objective, which is to help the shareholders stay invested in my company, right? And for that, I'm going to have to use data in a very interesting way, right? If I'm not good at data storytelling, I can mess it up completely. And it's the same data that 2 different companies can report in 2 different ways, depending on how good they are at storytelling. And based on what story they are telling, there will be an emotion that they will create in the audience, and the emotion that they create in the audience is going to result in action, right? If the audience, let's say in this case shareholders, listen to your story and say, hey, it doesn't seem like you're doing too good. What's the decision I'm going to take? Hey, let me cash out of this particular investment. And I could be an institutional investor, I could be a retail investor, I could be anybody, right? Right? And if you see how stock markets behave, they behave on emotions as well, right? You see how the stocks go up, stocks go down. It really depends on market rumors, who said what did the CEO say, they're launching this new business, there is a rumor that some new product is going to get launched, etc., etc., etc. And all of that. You guys heard about this recent saga of OpenAI and Sam Altman getting sacked and all of that. How many of you are following technology, right? Microsoft stock went up the moment Satya Nadella made an offer to Sam Altman to join Microsoft after he was sacked out of OpenAI. So these kind of things really trigger emotions. Everything. Do you even know what role Sam Altman is playing in OpenAI? None of us know. We don't have the inside view of what's going on out there, right? But you're going to get carried away by the narrative. Oh, Sam Altman was a founder. Oh, he's a great guy. Oh, he's doing, pivotal seminal work in ChatGPT and AI and all of that, and therefore he's an important person. So if he's getting sacked by a company, it must be not good for the company. So if I'm an investor, I'll get rallied by these emotions, right? And these emotions are triggered by what I see, read, and listen to. And what I see, read, and listen to is data stories of different shapes and form. On the internet, through official announcements, through unofficial announcements, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it's important to understand, if you are the storyteller in whatever context, remember three things. Who's your audience? Who are you telling the story to? What's the context of the story? And what do you want the audience to do? And the audience could be one person, could be many people, could be an entire country, could be the entire world, right? Right? When presidents of United States or India or anybody, they are addressing the nation, they are telling a story, right? All heads of states are great storytellers, right? Right? Modi ji is a great storyteller. No positive or negative emotion about it. This is not a political conversation. But they are great storytellers. They will use data in a manner that will create the right emotion, that will give you the right sentiment that they want to give you, not the real sentiment. The economy may be really bad, but I can make a presentation in 15 minutes about the economy by looking at some numbers and make you believe that economy is fantastic and we're the fastest growing economy in the world. And you will feel extremely motivated about it. What will it do? It will help you take decisions that will help the country, right? You understand what I'm saying? If I'm not good at storytelling, I can create the wrong emotions. And it can really create a very different action. So the power of storytelling is very, very crucial. Is what I want to establish with the three important facts, that you need to know why you're telling the story, who you're telling the story to, and what do you want out of the audience that you're telling the story to. These things are extremely important, without which you're not going to be making good stories out of data in any context. So keep these three things in mind. So let's dive into how do you therefore become good at it. So this is so far general knowledge. Okay, we understand that storytelling is important. We understand that we need to know who we're telling the story to. We understand that we need to know what action we want the audience to take, and we need to know the context of the story. Now what do we do with all of this? Here's I'm going to patent this flowchart later. So yeah, you're seeing it for the first time here. It's nowhere on the internet, but it's the simplest way in which you can understand the concept of data storytelling, right? In any scenario in the world, for any data story, you will always have a starting point, which is you will have some data and you will have some context. There is no data story without data and context. Okay, so starting point will always be some data and some context, right? Even in the most primitive stories, like the one that I started off this conversation with, like the kid came third in the race, right? There was data. What was the data? 3 people were running. What was the context? There was a race, right? So there was a context and there was data. Who was the storyteller? The kid. Who was the audience? The parents. What did the kid want out of that story? He wanted his parents to feel proud about him or her, right? So as simple as that, versus Tim Cook announcing Apple quarterly results. Again, what's the context? Quarterly company performance presentation. Who's the storyteller? The CEO of the company. Who's the audience? Shareholders. What does the storyteller want? He wants the shareholders to feel great about their investment in the company, and he wants them to invest more in the company. You see that from the most basic of examples to the most sophisticated and high impact of examples, the principles remain the same. There is a storyteller, there is an audience, and there is a context. And the storyteller wants the audience to experience a certain emotion so that they can make the audience take certain action. That construct remains the same, irrespective of the scenario you are playing it out in. Fair enough? So how do you get better at that context? Like now with this knowledge, how do I become good at it? How do I start telling great stories, right? Let's say if I become the CEO of Apple and I have to do an Apple quarterly presentation, how am I going to tell a good story? Or let's say today you get a job and you become an engineer with Microsoft and then you want to, again, remember, an interview process is also a storytelling exercise, by the way, right? When you're in an interview, you're telling the story of your life, of your career, of your education, about everything that you've done. How do you become good at that? So that you can get the interviewer to take the right action, which is what? To select you for the job, right? So again, plays out in the same scenario. So how do you get better at that? So the first step is you'll always have context and you'll always have some data to start with. Once you have that, what you need to do as a second step is you need to ask yourself this question. Okay, I have data, I have context. Do I have enough to build a good story? Sometimes the answer will be yes. You have enough. You can make a story out of this. Sometimes the answer will be no. You don't have enough data to make a story. Then what do you need to do? You need to get more data, right? You need to get more data. Understandable? If I tell you that, let's say I'll give you an example so that you understand this better. Let's say you scored 75 out of 100 in a maths test. That's the line. That's the data you have. There's a maths exam. You scored 75 on 100. Is there a story possible out of this data in this context? Can you build a story out of this? There is data. You got 75 out of 100. There is context. It was a maths test. And there is objective. You want to build a story out of it to tell your parents that you did good. Do you have enough data to tell the story? Can anyone take a guess? What's the story here? You're just stating a fact, right? When you go home and say, hey, I scored 75 out of 100. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that not good? Is that not bad? In this scenario, you don't have enough data to build a story. You understanding the situation? You have data and you have context, but you don't have enough data to build a good enough story to create the right enough emotion, right? What more data do you need? I need to see how many other people in the class scored above 75. If I know that, now I have a story. Only 10% people scored above 70. And I scored above 70. So I'm in the top 10% in the class. Now that's a story. I can go and say, hey guys, I scored in the top 10% in my maths test. That's a good story, right? So what happened here? I had some data, I had a context, but I didn't have enough data to build a story. What is the barometer for judging whether you have a good story or not? Are you able to create the right emotion or not? If you're not able to create the right emotion, you don't have a strong story. What do you need to do in that case? You need to go to the next step, which is get additional data. Get more data. Find out more stuff about it. Then you will know that you can build a story. And that is an iterative process. Let's say you get more data. Let's say same example. Let's stick with the same example. Okay, I scored 75 out of 100 in a maths test. It's not good enough data. It's not good enough data for me to build a story. So I dig more deep and I find out, hey, what's the situation? How many people in the class scored above 75? Let's say it's a class of 50 students. And I find out that all 50 students had scored above 75. I actually was the last. Like I am 75, everyone else is ahead of me. So I look for more data, it further weakens my story, right? I don't have a story. You understand what I'm saying? So what do I do now? I look for even more data. How much did I score in the maths test in the previous semester? Oh, I scored 60 in the previous semester. Great, so this is a personal achievement. I moved from 60 to 75. Now that's a story. I can go back home and say, hey guys, I have improved my performance by 25% or 30%, whatever the math is, right? From 60 to 75. That's a story. I choose to ignore the fact that every other kid in the class, I actually am rank 50 in a class of 50. That's not a good story. But I'm using the same data to build another story which says, hey, compared to my last performance, I'm up by 30%. What will it do to your parents? They'll feel proud of you. Oh, great, you're growing. It's good. You will feel good about yourself. When you tell yourself this story that I was at 60, now I'm at 75, that's great. I'm choosing to ignore the fact that I am the last in this test scores in my class. What if I choose to focus on that part of the data? I will feel miserable. This extrapolates to everything in life. You focus on what you don't have, you'll feel miserable. You focus on what you have, you'll feel great. 1% of people in the world today have the privilege that you guys have right now. 1% of people in the world. You are in the top 1%. You know what's the per capita income of India? 95% of people salaries are less than 25,000 rupees a month. It's a drastic, and some such ratio, of course. Don't strictly take it as 95%, but 90%, 95%, whatever. So the top 5% of India owns 90% of India's wealth. Top 5% of India owns 90% of India's wealth, right? That's Pareto's principle. Why am I giving these examples? To make you understand that if you focus on the right data which is necessary to build your story so that you can create the right emotion, then you can make it work. If you focus on the wrong data, you'll build the wrong story, you'll create the wrong emotion, and it will not work. You guys are getting the power of this? It is phenomenal. This is the superpower that everyone has. What stories are you telling yourself? What stories are you building? Right? Coming back to our flowchart. If you don't have enough data to build a good enough story, you look for more data. When you look for more data and you find out that you still don't have enough, look for even more data. Right? Until you reach a point where you can build a compelling story. However, it's important that it's not always necessary that more data equal to a richer story, right? There is if you plot a story richness versus data availability graph, it'll end up looking like this. Up to a certain point, as the data increases, your story's richness will keep increasing. But after it has hit that max level, with more data, your story richness will not necessarily increase. You will get into a data deluge and you will start looking at, let's say again, take the same example, maths test, I scored 75, I looked for more data, I figured out that, hey, everyone else has scored above 75, so I'm last, that's not helping. I look for more data, I reach a point where I realize that, hey, okay, I scored 60 in the previous maths test and now I scored 75, so that's a good story. I need to stop right there. Once I find the eureka moment, I need to stop. What if I keep drilling? And I say, hey, what happened? How much did I score in the geography test? Okay, you scored something in the geography test. What happened to other kids in Philadelphia who appeared in the maths test in the same time zone 3 years back? That's another piece of data. That's not useful to me. I can keep dicing and diving into data and keep finding out too many things, but it's not useful. It's not necessarily going to contribute to my story. I may get lost in that data deluge. That's another problem that most people and organizations today are facing. There is an overload of data. You have so much data that you actually don't know what to do. You're not able to ask the right questions, you're not able to build the right hypothesis, you're not able to build the right stories, and you're drowning in this data deluge. Then eventually, you'll try and do something out of it, and you'll build some use cases or applications or stories out of it, and that will not be optimal. Which is why you follow that process. What is the process? Look at the data and context you have. See if it's good enough to build the right story. What's your objective? You want to create the right emotion in your audience. Are you able to do that with the data and context you have? Yes, great. Build your story, get done with it. If no, go further, get more data. Get more data up to a point where you can build a good enough story. Don't endlessly keep getting more data, right? In some cases, more data may not be possible. Like there is no more data available, right? You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes you may get into a situation where there is just no more data available. What do you do in that case? You extract more value from your current data. How do you extract more value from your current data? There are tools, techniques, and there's this whole field of data science, right? There's clustering, there's random forest, there is regression, there is averages, there is a whole bunch of science and tools that you can use to extract more value from existing data without adding more data at all, right? And we'll see some examples to illustrate this. So if you're in a position where you do not have access to more data, what you need to do is you need to extract more from your existing data. And while extracting more from existing data, keep 3 or 4 principles in mind, right? Number 1 is sample is not the population, okay? Most people have a habit of extrapolating too quickly, right? Let's say for the first time ever, you dive into the water to learn swimming and you make a mess out of it. You kind of get choked and then you come out of this and say, hey, swimming is not for me, I can't swim, right? You concluded, right? You concluded on something based on how many data points? Just 1 data point. You attempted swimming how many times? Just once. And you concluded that swimming is not for me. What did you do? You extrapolated a sample to a population. What if you try again? What if you try the 3rd time? What if you try the 4th time? What if you use better swimming gear? What if you fix other issues with it? What if you fix the trainer? You get a better trainer, go to a better pool, use a better technique, use some better equipments, right? There are so many things that you can fix to fix the outcome. But people usually are very quick to jump to conclusions. So do not jump to conclusions and do not extrapolate quickly. Allow your opinion or your judgment to be formed based on more data points rather than concluding with a smaller set of data points. And there are many such aspects of it. There's just one more thing that I'll quickly touch upon, which is correlation is not causation. That's another principle you need to keep in mind when you're extracting more value from your existing data. You understand what is the meaning of correlation is not causation? Okay, if 2 things are correlated, does not mean one thing is causing the other. If 2 things are correlated, does not mean one thing is causing the other, right? What if you are stepping out of the house and a black cat crosses your path? Some people would say, oh, that's bad omen, right? Oh, black cat crossed my path, something bad is going to happen. And something bad actually happens. Why? Because you put your mind in an extremely negative state that you created the bad thing, literally. You made a mess of it because you programmed yourself to believe that because the black cat has crossed my path, you will make something bad happen with that state of mind. Why? Because you are assuming the 2 events are correlated. Why? Because at some point in the past, somebody would have experienced that where they ended up in a situation which was not a very favorable situation because a black cat crossed their path. It was just a correlation. It just happened to be 2 independent events. But you established a relationship between those 2 events and you made one event cause the other. I'll take another data-driven example. For example, in the US, this is again a published data set where every time ice cream sales go up, crime rates go up. Now, is there do you think increase in ice cream sales is causing the crime rates to go up in some way? But it happens every single time. Every time you have a rise in ice cream sales, crime rates go up. What's going on there? A lot of people will conclude, hey, let's put a ban on ice cream sales, man, because this is ridiculous, right? You put a ban on ice cream sales, crime rates don't go down, right? But you ended up messing up an industry, right, by taking a decision like that. A lot of decisions, by the way, get taken like that, where correlation is assumed to be causation. Where you feel that 2 things are happening together means one thing is causing the other. Even if 2 things are happening together in 10 out of 10 times, does not conclusively mean that one thing is causing another. Like they look at 10 data points every time in the last 10 years, whenever ice cream sales went up, crime rates went up. So some smart ass data scientist will come to the governor's office and present a chart saying, look, this is happening for the last 10 years. Every time we have a spike in ice cream sales, we see a spike in crime rates. So definitely something is going on there. And then there will be a campaign and propaganda to stop ice cream, and people consume ice cream, they get on a sugar high, and then they go start robbing and hitting people, right? There could be a story out there that they'll start propagating, and then they'll antagonize ice cream. Ice cream is bad, stop ice creams, and there'll be people standing with banners on the street saying we don't want ice creams, and all of that will start happening. Why? Because somebody made a wrong assumption and misinterpreted correlation as cause and effect and then built a story around it. What is the problem? The problem is, even though 10 out of 10 times both these things happened together, it was just a correlation. You know why? They dug deeper into it to figure out that the ice cream sales go up during summer, okay, because it's hot. People eat more ice cream. Also during summers, people go out on holidays, right? So they go out on vacations. And when they go out on vacations, the robbers get a chance to rob into their houses, right? Because all the houses are abandoned. Everyone's out on vacation, right? So it is summer which is the causal variable, not the ice cream. And summer is the causal variable that is causing the ice cream sales to go up and causing the crime rates to go up. You understand what I'm saying? It's not the ice cream sales and the crime rates. And this is an example that you should try and understand, that sometimes there could be a third variable causing both the outcomes that you are assuming are correlated. This principle applies in many, many scenarios. So every time you're interpreting data, don't fall in this trap of misinterpreting correlation for cause and effect. Two things happening together do not mean one thing is causing the other, right? You know, this is another thing where when people were starting to build airplanes, right? I mean, humans, when they started building airplanes for the first time, they saw birds. They said birds could fly, right? So if we had to fly, what should we do? They made a correlation which said birds have wings, right? Birds have wings which they can flap. And because of that, they can fly, right? So what did they do? They made a wrong correlation that to fly, you need to have wings which you can flap. And if you see some of the early videos of humans learning to fly, there are people jumping off the cliff with wings and they're crashing down on the ground. Sad, but true. Why? Because they were operating out of this correlation that to be able to fly, you need to have flappable wings, because they see birds doing the same thing. But that was a correlation. That was not a cause and effect. Birds are not able to fly because they can flap their wings. Birds are able to fly because they have a hollow body. Okay? And that's what resulted in the invention of the vacuum chamber in airplanes. You build the airplane in such a way that the center of gravity of the plane is balanced out, and there is enough vacuum and space inside the plane that allows it to experience the mechanism of lift. There is more physics to it. And that's when we started figuring out better, smarter ways of building airplanes. When we dismantled this correlation that you don't need flappable wings to fly. You need something more fundamental. So these are examples, guys, to highlight the fact that sometimes everyone can fall in this kind of a trap, and you have to get better at identifying these scenarios which inhibit your ability to do something. All right, cool. And last but not the least, once you've figured out everything, it's important to build the story in a manner that is visually impactful. Not all stories are going to be visual, remember that. Every data story doesn't need to be visually interesting. It could just be a one-liner statement. Like I said, I came third. There's no visual there. It's just a one-line statement, right? But it's powerful enough. But if you're making a presentation, let's say you're doing a quarterly review with your team, you are a manager and you're presenting to your VP or whatever is the context of your presentation, or your school student, you're presenting your thesis or your project plan or whatever insights you have, if you're putting it up on a slide or if you're putting it up on some kind of a PDF document, make sure that your visual representation is absolutely A+. Because good insights presented in a bad way will not help you create the right emotion. So wherever there is visual context involved, where there's a presentation or a document involved, ensure that your document quality does not dilute your insights quality. It should amplify your insights. And that's why it's important to choose the right graphs, the right charts, the right font, the right language, the right words to ensure that you're able to package it in a manner that amplifies the insights that you're sharing, right? I have seen people, people who are partners in, and I don't want to name organizations, but large consulting firms and all, they make presentations, right? Their presentations are absolutely boring. Like there is so much content on the slide, like there's so much text, like you can't even read, like what's really written out there. There is a lot of interesting stuff there, but there is no way you can consume it because it is packaged in a manner that's not interesting. And that's not a good story. You may have good insight, but not packaged well. It will not help you create the right emotion that you want to create. Remember, your end game is to create the right emotion in your audience. If you're not able to create the right emotion, your story has failed. Right? So important to keep that in mind. All right. You guys are feeling like a bit of a data storyteller already with some of this, whatever we spoke about. Let's now look at an example. Okay, let's wear this hat of a marketing manager of a large format multi-brand retail store, something like a Shopper Stop, let's say hypothetically. So you have multiple brands and you're a big store and you are a marketing manager, right? Everyone can understand that. Very simple, right? You're the marketing manager of a large format retail store. What do you want to do? You want to get an approval from the VP of marketing for designing offers, right? You see these stores running offers of different kinds, buy one, get one free, 50% off on your next purchase, whatever. If you're a loyalty club member, you get extra benefits, extra points. There are all kinds of offers that you see in these stores, right? Like when you create these offers, there is some science that's going behind that, right? Because ultimately, everything is a cost versus benefit. You have to figure out the ROI, right? Why do they say that you buy more than 5,000 bucks and you're going to get you're going to get 1,000 rupees voucher that you can redeem in your next purchase? Everyone's heard of these kind of things? So when they design these offers, they put a lot of science and math behind it. They know that if I can get 10% of my customers to spend more than 5,000 rupees in a week, I will be able to create X amount of rise in revenue, Y amount of rise in profitability, and Z amount of rise in repeat transactions, which are the numbers that I want to focus on for my organization's benefit. And to do that, I'm going to invest in this offer. And I'm going to invest in this offer in a manner where I can recover my investment over the next few transactions. There is a concept called as customer lifetime value. Okay? You do not make all the money from the customer in that first transaction. You're going to make money from the transactions over a period of time. When you open a bank account, that's the first transaction you do with the bank, which is actually a loss for the bank. Any bank in India today, or anywhere in the world for that matter, roughly has a customer acquisition cost of 2,500 rupees. So every time you sign up a customer, you spend 2,500 rupees to acquire that customer, right? So when the customer enters your world, you are at a negative. Then when the customer starts putting money in their savings account, starts investing in mutual funds, starts buying life insurance products, starts taking loans, right? That's when over a period of time, your value from that customer will start increasing, right? So you will focus on investing in customer acquisition because you know that over a period of time, you're going to be able to derive more value out of these customers. And that same principle is applied when you create offers. I want to throw an offer to a customer. Why? Because I know that that offer is going to eventually compound the value that I can create out of this customer, right? So there is some science that goes behind creating offers. So that was just a quick background. Coming back to our example. So let's assume you're a marketing manager and you want to create some offers. So I'm going to take one data cut to explain the context of this conversation, where based on, so what kind of offer should I create? Let's say that's my dilemma. My context is I want to create some offers. What kind of offers should I create? So I'm going to look into the data that I have. What's the data that I have? These are 5 categories of customers I have. Based on what? Based on the value they spent in their first transaction. Everyone understands that? The amount of money a customer has spent in their first transaction, I'm going to categorize them based on that. So all the, the magenta customers are customers who spent between 500 rupees to 1,000 rupees in their first transaction with me. Okay? All the purple ones are the ones that have spent between 1,000 rupees to 1,500 rupees in their first transaction. Yellow ones have spent 1,500 to 2,000 in their first transaction. Red ones have spent 2,000 to 3,000 bucks in their first transaction. And green ones have spent more than 3,000 rupees in their first transaction. Understood? That's the data I have. The context is I want to use this data to create a story that I can tell my VP of marketing so that he can allocate some budgets for me to create some offers. Understood? All right. Let's look at this data. Now, based on these 5 categorizations, this is what my customer database looks like, right? I have all these 5 categories of people sitting here. The first step in data storytelling is, you look at your data, you might get overwhelmed. You'll see that, hey, there's a lot going on here. I don't even know what to do. Where do I start? The first step is segment the data. Now when I do this, I have a better view of what's going on there. I see who these people are, right? Now I want to focus on this one segment, which is the green segment. What is the green segment? People who have done more than 3,000 rupees in their first transaction. Why am I interested in this segment? Because this is a high value segment, right? These are people who spend more than 3,000 rupees in their first transaction. This is my highest value segment. if I arrive at this segment, do I have enough of a story right here? Do I have a story that I can go to my whatever VP of marketing and ask for budgets for offers? Not yet, right? What will you tell him? Hey, there are customers who spent more than 3,000 in their first transaction. So what? Obviously, this is an observation. This is a data observation. It doesn't yet have enough ammunition to become a story. So I would want to get more data, right? What more data can I get? So I'm going to get more data for this segment. What is that data? What is the probability of these customers to do a repeat transaction in the next 90 days? That's my second layer of data. 75%. What does it mean? If a customer spends more than 3,000 rupees in their first transaction, their probability of doing the next transaction within the next 90 days or within the next 90 days is 75%, right? Which means what? Which means what? I need to be able to do what? I can go to my head of marketing with this story, saying those customers who spend more than 3,000 bucks in their first transaction have a 75% probability of coming back in 90 days. So we should design offers that incentivize customers to do more than 3,000 rupees in their first transaction. Which is why when you go to these stores and you start buying things, they'll say, hey, buy more than 3,000 bucks and you're going to get a bag free. Buy more than 3,000 bucks and you're going to get a voucher free. Buy more than 5,000 bucks and you're going to get XYZ free, whatever. Why are they doing that? Because they know that if you're able to make that first transaction go above a certain cutoff, their probability of coming back is going to be higher. And this is a story, right? Just by saying that I have X number of customers doing more than 3,000 in their first transaction is not a story. I need to go deeper, get more data. Once I get more data, I have a fully formed story where I can connect the emotion that I want to create. Now, when the marketing head looks at this data, he'll say, yeah, this is interesting, right? I want customers to come back and buy more from me. To be able to do that, I need to invest in offers. What kind of offers? Offers that incentivize the first transaction to be more than 3,000 bucks. Sounds okay? Great. Let's look at another example. This is a simpler one. The context is, again, this Apple quarterly share. This is an interesting one. I want you guys to take a crack at this, okay? The data that you have, the context is you are Tim Cook, okay? You're the CEO of Apple. You're making an Apple quarterly or an annual presentation to show your annual performance. There is this one slide where you have to now talk about your operating system market share. Everyone knows Apple has an operating system, right? What's the Apple operating system called? Mac OS, right? And which is the rival operating system? Windows, right? Windows is Microsoft, Apple is Mac OS, right? So as an Apple CEO, you want to create this slide where you want to show what's the performance of your operating system in the market, right? The data that you have is market share of different companies in the operating system space in the last financial year. What are the market shares? Microsoft is 90, Apple is 6, Linux is 2, and others are 2. This is all the data you have. Do you have a story here? Do you have a story? You don't have a story? Anyone wants to take a shot at this? There is a story here. It's a weak story, but what's the story? Can you create any emotion out of this? When you want to ask yourself this question, what is the story? The question you should ask yourself is, can I create the emotion that I want to create? What's the emotion you want to create? You want to create a good emotion, right? You want to create a happy emotion in your shareholders. How can I use this data to create a happy emotion? There is a weak story here, which is Apple is the world's #2 desktop operating system manufacturer in the world. You are the #2 OS maker in the world. Yeah? It's not a strong story, right? It's not a strong story, but it's a story. It's a story. You can go out there and say, hey, I'm the #2 OS maker in the world, which is a story, but not a strong story. So what do? We look at more data. What data do we look at? What were the market shares of these players in the previous year? Let me look at the data of market shares of these operating systems in the previous year. And what do I find? Microsoft was 93%, Apple was 3%, Linux was 2%, and others were 2%, which means what? Do I have a story now? What's the story? Exactly. The story is Apple market share has doubled over the last year, which makes Apple the fastest growing operating system in the world. How does that sound? As opposed to saying that, hey, I'm the number 2 operating system in the world. It also is not a bad statement to make, but it's not a powerful story. But if you are a really good storyteller, what are you going to say? You're going to dive in, get more data, connect the dots, and now you have a really powerful story. Apple is the fastest growing operating system in the world. It has doubled its market share in the last 1 year. Does that sound good? That's a story. And you know it's a good story when you can experience that emotion yourself. That the emotion that you want your audience to experience. That's your barometer to check whether you have a good story or not. If you don't have a good story, go back again. Look for more data until you get to that point where you know that you have. And trust me, you will always have a good story hidden in any data. Any data. You only have to dive deeper to find that gold. Any data cut will have the potential of a great story. And the mark of a great storyteller is how can you keep diving deeper to get to that point where you can connect the dots in a manner that makes it a good story, creates the right emotion, right? Sounds good? Let's look at one quick example again. This is a different one, right? Like, let's say Japan experiences an earthquake, okay? You are the editor of the leading Japanese newspaper and you want to report this data now. What is the data? Earthquake, there was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake on Richter scale that shook Japan. That is the event. Earthquake happened, 7.5 on Richter scale. So there is data there. What is the data? 7.5 on Richter scale. What is the context? Earthquake happened, right? You are the editor of the newspaper. This is your headline. What are you going to make your headline look like? Do you have a story here with this data? Is there a story? Some newspapers will publish this. Japan was hit by an earthquake of 7.5 magnitude. Plain, objective, factual reporting, right? What emotion does this create in you as a reader? Who's the audience for this? Readers who are reading the newspapers. Who's the storyteller? The editor who's writing the copy for that headline. Audience is the people who are reading the newspaper. What is the emotion that he wants them to experience? In this case, this line does not invoke any emotion. I don't know. So what? 7.5 magnitude on Richter scale means what? So what? I need more data. Some editors will allow this to pass and they'll print this. Next day morning, Japan is hit by a 7.5 magnitude Richter scale earthquake. Period. The readers will read that. They'll say, okay, so should I feel happy? Should I feel sad? Should I feel happy that I'm alive? Should I feel sad that earthquake happened? Should I be indifferent? You'll be confused. That's not good readership. That's not good readership, right? But if you're a smart editor and you're a good story, and therefore you have to be a good storyteller, what are you going to do? You're saying, okay, this is news, but I need more data. What more data do you need? No one was killed. There was 0 casualties. 7.5 magnitude Richter earthquake, 0 casualties. The highest earthquake that has hit Japan in the last 10 years was 8.9 on Richter scale. Okay? 90% of Japanese infrastructure is resilient to earthquakes up to 9 magnitude on Richter scale. Which means what? If I look at more data, I get to know that no one was killed, so there was 0 casualties. I get to know that there was a even more worse earthquake that had hit 5 years back. And I also understand that 90% of Japanese infrastructure is resistant to earthquakes up to 9 magnitude on Richter scale, right? So, do we have a story now? The story is unshakable Japan. No casualties despite a 7.5 magnitude earthquake today. Unshakable Japan, right? That sounds interesting. If I'm a Japanese person reading the newspaper, great, we are resilient. It will tap into a very powerful, we are the land of the samurais and the shoguns and the Toyotas and the Hondas. We are resilient people. We are not shaken up by an earthquake. It will make them feel great. You see what you're doing? You're tapping into a really strong emotion by saying that Japan is unshakable. Why? Because a 7.5 magnitude earthquake does nothing to us. Why? Because our infrastructure is resilient up to 9 pointer on Richter scale. And the worst that we've seen in the last decade is 8.5. So it's a normal event for us. You see how this changes the story? As opposed to just saying that 7.5 magnitude earthquake hit us. You actually build a story out of it, which tapped into the emotion. The readers will feel great reading that. And that's the objective. So now you can see the difference between a good story and a not so good story, right? So far so good? Let's bring this all together in the last example before we wind up. And this is an interesting one. Last example, so give it your best shot, okay? What is the context? Let's say you're the math teacher and you have to present the performance of your students in a math test to the principal of the school. Got the context? You're the math teacher, you took a math test, there were 11 students in your class, they got some scores, you have to present the outcome of the maths test to your school's principal, right? That is the context. What is the data? 10 students with their scores out of 10. The names have no correlation to any person living or existing. It's Rohit, Shubman, Virat, Shreyas, Rahul, Surya, Ravindra, Siraj, Shami, Jasprit. Sound familiar, right? These are 10 students in the class. Rohit got 7 out of 10. Shubman got 6 out of 10. Virat got 7 out of 10. Shreyas got 6 out of 10. Rahul got 5 out of 10. Surya got 9 out of 10. Ravindra got 6 out of 10. Siraj got 9 out of 10. Shami got 7 out of 10. And Jasprit got 7 out of 10. Do we have a story? What's the story? Everybody scored more than? Yeah. Is that a good enough story? It's a story for sure. 100% results. Everyone passed and no one failed. Okay. Good story. Not a great story. Good story for sure. What do we do? If you don't have a good story, what do you do? What do you do, everyone? Look for more data. Let's extract, but we don't have any more data, let's say. So what do we do? Let's extract more. Remember I said you can extract more value out of the same data that you have. How do you extract more value out of this? Some of you already mentioned that, by the way. So I'm going to break this data down into 4 categories. 20% of people got 9. 30% got 6. 10% got 5 and 40% got 7, right? What did I do? I just categorized them based on percentages. Suddenly it's becoming more interesting now, right? So we can now say 60% students scored 70%, 60% of the students scored 70% or above, right? 90% students scored 60% and above. So what's the story? We have a first class performance in the maths test. Why? Because 90% students scored more than 60, which is considered as first class in some educational systems, right? So what's the story? 90% means more or less everyone, right? You can exclude one outlier. Everyone knows what's the concept of an outlier. If there is one data point or 10% of data which is not conforming to a larger observation, you can ignore that data because it's an outlier. It's not the, everyone knows the concept of a bell curve, normal distribution. There's a very famous curve called the bell curve, which actually tells you that, see, some of these concepts, I want you guys to also take away some of these pointers as reading material for you guys later on. Read about Fibonacci numbers, read about Pareto's principle, read about bell curves and normal distribution. These are standard concepts. These are not statistical concepts. These are standard concepts. Read a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. That's a good book to read if you want to really develop interest in data and storytelling. Anyway, this session is being recorded, so I guess eventually you guys will get a copy of this, so you'll know what we spoke about, right? So you don't need to take notes. But hey, stay with me on this, right? What's the story? We have a first class performance from the class. Is that a good story? But if you are a data storyteller, you want more. You're like, this is good, but I want to get some more action out of this. How do I get more action out of this? What do I do? What can I do to get more action out of this? This is a good story. 90% people will settle, say, hey, this is a good story. I go to the principal and make this presentation saying, hey, this is a great story. I just took a maths test and we have a first class performance from the entire class. Principal will feel great. They'll say, awesome, great, super, very good. But I want more. What do I do? Look for more data. Maybe previous scores, right? Maybe this time I try to look at something else. Now, this is another important point I want to make. When you look for more data, you need to know what data you should look for. Because when you say more data, it could mean anything. I could look at previous test performance. I could look at many other aspects of it, right? Now, that's where your maturity as a data analyst comes into play. How do you ask the right questions? What data to look for? What story you want to establish? What is your null hypothesis? How are you framing your hypothesis? Because depending on how you're framing your question, you will find the answer, right? Remember, in today's data world, answers are all out there. You only need to have the right questions. The problem is a lot easier today than it was before. You don't have to look for answers. You have to look for questions. What do you want? Everything is out there. What do you really want? And if I'm a maths teacher, I want more out of this. What am I going to do? I'm going to look at another data set. What is that data set? I'm going to look at attendance data of these students in the last semester. This is the attendance data of these students in the previous semester. And I'm going to look at both these data points together now. Now, this is where my skill as a data scientist comes in, where I know what data to throw into the mix to be able to get a juicier story. If you look at the attendance data, largely, can you guys see the attendance data on the screen? So Rohit has 7 out of 10. His score is 7 out of 10. His attendance is 75%. Shubman has a score of 6 out of 10. His attendance is 82%. Virat has a score of 7 out of 10. His attendance is 79%. Shreyas has a score of 6 out of 10. Attendance 84%. Rahul has a score of 5 out of 10. His attendance is 10%. Surya has a score of 9 out of 10, but his attendance is just 20%. And then the rest of it, Ravindra has 6, attendance 78%, Siraj has 9, attendance 97%, Shami has 7, attendance 77%, Jaspreet has 7, attendance is 91%. What does this data tell you? Is Surya? Surya is an outlier. Except for that one data point, there is a strong positive correlation between attendance and scores. Everyone with high attendance has high scores, except Surya, right? So I can ignore that one data point. And what story do I have? Attendance have scored good marks. So what's the action that I want the principal to take? Ensure that you have good attendance. That's a juicier story, isn't it? So we have a first class performance in the class, and the kids with good attendance have scored great marks. Is that a powerful story? Is that a powerful story? How did we get to it? By looking at the right data. And this is the process you got to do. Look at the data you have. Build your story. Is it creating the right emotion? No. Look for more data. Build the story again. Is it creating the right emotion? Yeah, but not great. Okay, go back. Extract more from your existing data. Look for more data. Get to a point where you feel that, yes, this is a powerful emotion that I'm able to create. That's when you have a great story. Everyone with me? And this, on a closing note, I want to tell you guys, because some of you guys may be in your careers, in different points in your careers and all. I want you guys to bring all your learning into data storytelling, all of that into your professional lives, but also focus on building a great resume story. Okay? That's one parting thought I want to leave you with. If you see every resume, they look the same. Every resume looks the same, right? It has a, I have studied here, my hobbies are traveling, surfing the internet, and blah, 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 whatever. It's not great, right? How does your resume stand out? How does your resume really cut the clutter? I took a crack at my own resume. I was doing a separate session on effective resume building, and I just borrowed a few slides from that session into this, just to show you guys how can you make a resume slightly more impactful than what it is by telling an effective resume story. And this means when you're applying to a company, your resume should be aligned to the company that you're applying for. Why? What is the first principle of storytelling? Who is your audience? What do you want the audience to do? And that's how you should build your story, right? So I built this resume. This is how my resume looks. 16 years of experience, 10 years of entrepreneurial experience, 3 years of professional leadership experience. These are the organizations I work with: Cartesian, Directions, Qantas, Wipro. I'm an engineer and an MBA. So this is a good first slide, right? Somebody looks at it, oh, looks interesting. It's different, right? And then you see those 5 little icons there. Those are the 5 stories I have in my resume. You see each icon expands into a story. This talks about my most recent experience. This talks about my overall experience. This talks about my core strengths. This talks about my education. And with relevant links which people can go and check out if they want to. If there's a research report, if there's a video, if there's anything that you have, pack it into the resume so that people can get more information. This is some information about my extracurricular interests. What do I do? How do I do? Whatever. And on a closing note, I have some recommendations from people that they've put up on my LinkedIn profile. So I'm going to put that up here as well. So this is a more effective resume story than just having a standard verbose resume to show up, right? So on a closing note, what I want to tell you guys is you have to focus on becoming better storytellers, because the use cases for better storytelling are infinite. Every opportunity you have of having a conversation where you want the other person to do something for you, you need to become good at telling stories. Right from that small kid who came home and said, I came third, to the CEO of Apple who said, Apple is the fastest growing operating system in the world. The principles remain the same. So become a good data storyteller and you can achieve whatever you want in life. Sounds good? Thank you guys. That's it.